All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Today we have a very special guest. I know, I say that all the time, but we really do. We have Alex Driver with Compass Box. Yes, you heard it right, with Compass Box. And if this is your first time listening to this podcast, I don't know why it would be. We're all over the place. But if it is, what we like to do is like to talk to brands about whiskey and talk about all their things that they're doing. And Compass Box was gracious enough. Alex responded back to me and was gracious enough to come on here and talk to us. So without further ado, here's Alex. How's it going, brother?
It's going good. It's going good. Thank you for making the time.
No problem. And I will let our listeners know it is early in the morning our time. We are doing some time traveling here, so we will not be partaking. I have some coffee here, so but I will say that I'm really excited to get into this. We've been chatting back and forth, and I'm really excited to get into the whole story of Compass Box. I know of Compass Box. Obviously, I don't live under a rock, but you guys are, well, I'm going to let you start. Where did how did you get involved in Compass Box?
Well, I got involved in Compass Box quite a long time ago. I think the first time I stepped foot through the doors was 2009. I
Oh
was
wow.
sort of between universities. I was sort of helping out, doing a bit of admin work, and I've always been in touch. And so when I started working for Compass Box properly, it was back in 2019. So 10 years later, we used to have a program called The Circle.
Hmm.
It's sort of our bartender competition. Unlike other bartender competitions, the prize was to make a blended whiskey with us. So have your name on a bottle. So kind of a cool thing. So I came in, helped out. I just recently stopped doing my own kind of business and then didn't stop working here. And sort of from there, lockdown happened, continued working, kind of helping out on the marketing side, and ended up kind of in my current role, which is insights and education.
All right, awesome. That's a pretty cool story. So you did marketing beforehand? Is that what you said?
So yeah, so before Compass Box, so I started a business, and then before that, worked in other kind of smaller marketing firms.
Okay.
So came in helping out with sort of marketing for the show, and then from there, helping out the marketing department, and then moved that further into kind of so insights is more about kind of consumer research, consumer
Hmm.
insights, and then from there we'll get into our portfolio a little bit, but sort of helping to decide kind of what questions we need to ask, what's going right, what's going wrong, and ultimately kind of how can we make the best whiskey that like talks to the most amount of people, but keeping it authentically Compass Box.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so for those of you who don't know and that live under a rock, Compass Box is a blending house. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay. So kind of give us a little bit of the backstory of Compass Box for those who don't know that.
I'll go back to the beginning. We were started in 2000, so we're kind of older than some people think, but we're also younger than, let's say, most Scotch whisky companies.
Right.
Founded by John Glazer. He was a former executive at a very large blended Scotch whisky company. And then from there, he kind of thought, well, maybe the world of Scotch whisky could be a bit more interesting.
Hmm.
Blended Scotch is quite, at the time, it's very traditional, large volumes. No one talked about the ingredients. No one talked about the components of the whiskies.
Right.
And so he had this idea to kind of have something which is smaller batch. You kind of have a couple of distilleries, maybe 2 to 5, and really highlight the kind of virtues of the individual components, but at the same time pushing forward the beauty that is blending, because actually you can achieve so much with adding in these different layers, kind of the complexity as well as the balance, and you end up with kind of something that's very compelling. Over the last 24 years, we've been making a variety of different whiskies. Recently, I was going through our archive. I've got up to about 152 different whiskies,
Good
which is a
Lord.
lot.
That's a lot.
But always with that, yeah. And it, it's one of those things we've been doing since the beginning is bringing whiskies into the core collection, taking them out. But yeah, so that's where we started, going for a long time. And it's very nice of you to say that kind of if you've been living on a rock, you shouldn't have heard of us. But we have this strange thing as a brand where we are both, you know, the number 11 most admired whiskey brand in the world, and yet most people don't know who we are. And so it's that strange kind of like balance between everyone who's in the industry, who kind of works in this, has heard about kind of what Compass Box does, what we're about, which is kind of highlighting, showcasing individual expressions, talking about flavor, talking about components, process and transparency, and yet go to a broader audience, and very few people have heard of us.
Right. Exactly. And so to me, that's super cool that like you guys are well known enough for, I call us the whiskey nerds to be like, yes, Compass Box, absolutely. And then the outer market is like, what? Who's Compass Box? You know, and I mean, you coming from a marketing standpoint, I'm sure that is sometimes frustrating because you're like, we need to either, you know, go big or go home on this. Is that not true?
It's twofold, because part of what makes Compass Box is that we're whiskey nerds, right? Like it's when. We're not doing this because it's purely just a commercial venture. The company begins because it begins with this idea of kind of what interests us. Mm-hmm. We can get into kind of how we make whiskey, but it's not just about kind of what's the current trend. And that sounds funny from someone who's the insights manager, right? To go, okay, but like it's not about following trends, finding what's popular. In a weird sense, a lot of what I'm trying to do is to look at what is everyone else is doing and then make sure we don't do that.
Yes.
And so for us, because we're passionate, we're really interested in what's going on in the whiskey industry. A lot of the whiskeys we make are kind of category commentaries. This is some of our most famous ones from the past. Like, have you ever heard of 3-Year-Old Deluxe?
No.
So this is a funny thing. We've been in trouble in the past as Compass Box with SWA, Scotch Whisky Association. Mm-hmm. We often do things which apparently kind of you're not meant to do. We used to list the ingredients on the back labels with the ages, and you can't put the age of a whiskey, apart from the youngest component, on the back label. We thought if you broke it down by percentage and exact distillery and exact age, that would be quite obvious that we're not trying to be deceptive. But right. Because we were told we couldn't do that anymore, we made a whiskey called 3-Year-Old Deluxe, which was, I think, 1% 3-year-old whiskey. The rest was about 30. And we said it's the best 3-year-old whiskey you'll ever drink.
That's funny. Okay. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. So that's kind of always been part of our kind of DNA is looking at that, looking at the industry as a whole, looking at what's interesting at the moment, and then also trying to push those boundaries. I think, you know, one of our core statements is we want to make the world of Scotch whisky a more interesting place.
Right.
In a large part, and I think this is kind of cool, we can say as a brand, it has become a lot more interesting. You know, the world has changed. The world of whiskey has changed since the early 2000s. And you see so many more interesting brands, cool brands. And so for us, it's quite nice to have been part of that. But it's also quite nice to continue to push the boundaries.
Right. Absolutely.
It becomes harder when you have more people around you, but that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you want to make sure that you're still going towards your core audience, but yet branching out just enough to where you can get some more people in, and also making very interesting and cool blends and stuff like that. So what kind of separates you guys from some of the other blending houses that are out there?
I think there's a few things that separate us. Number one, our labels. I happen to be in the blending room right now. This is our very nice new blending room in Richmond, in London. Yes, as a Scotch whisky company, we are technically based in London, which is probably one thing that sets us apart from a lot of other brands. Right. Although, funny enough, William Grant & Sons is just down the road. Their head office, that is. And so, yeah, based here. And so you can see behind me a lot of our labels. We're kind of very into whiskey's not just about the whiskey inside the bottle. We went to all this effort to create it, to blend it. It's important that it also looks and feels a certain way. Like it has to be appealing in all aspects. And we can use the label to do a lot of storytelling. You know, traditional whiskey is very romantic, and it talks about a place in Scotland. And there's this kind of, and a lot of that is done through the marketing. For us, we don't have a place in Scotland. We're about Scotch whisky and potential and all the things it could be. And so the look of the label, the feel of the label, quality, the interaction, and the detail becomes what's important. I remember who said it. It's details aren't details. Details are everything.
Right.
So that's one aspect. And then another part is that transparency. I know a lot of people, a lot of new brands followed suit. It's really inspiring to see certain kind of like newer blending houses, newer blends coming through, and they're really kind of highlighting the percentages. When we first started our transparency campaign back in the 2000s, the other company who came in with us was Bruichladdich. So if you go on Bruichladdich website, you'll see they'll break down their recipes for batches by cask, by origin. They can't put the ages in it, but we'll give you as much information as we can. We do a lot of stuff on our websites. We'll give you a whole percentage breakdown with cask type, with distillery where we can. And if you email us, then I will tell you exactly what's in the, I can tell you, it's funny, once it's in the bottle, once you've bought it, I can tell you exactly the ages of each individual component. But it's only at that point. And it's not a workaround for the law. It's just, at that point, I'm not marketing anymore.
Right, exactly. We've already, yeah. You've already purchased the bottle, so therefore there's no need to market it. You already have it in your hand.
And at that point, I can tell you.
Yeah, exactly. That's super cool. And, one of the things that we are all about on this channel is transparency and just making sure that what you say is on the bottle is actually what's in the glass. And I feel like I've had multiple Compass boxes, obviously, in the past, and they are all very transparent in what they are. And like you said, if you go on the website, you can get even deeper into what's in the glass, because, and I'm not poo-pooing these other people, but there is other people that are just getting random whiskeys and putting them together and calling them a unique blend or something like that. And that's not really what you guys are focusing on. You guys are focusing on accentuating aspects and, blending it all together to make a new whiskey, but yet it's accentuated by A, B, and C from these other whiskeys, taking 3 or 4 whatever whiskeys and turning them into a new thing. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think one of the interesting things that we can do with that is talk about how it's not a recipe, even though we call it a recipe wheel. When we break down the composition of the whiskey into the different component distilleries, important is the distillery, it's not the brand. They're two separate things. It gives you an idea of kind of roots of flavor into the product, but ultimately you can't replicate it, because those casks, as we all know from trying single casks, can be wildly different. And so a lot of the work that we do is about trying to marry those different things together to bring it in, to fill into a profile for a core collection whiskey, because we're trying to pursue that consistency of flavor. But being a blender and being a kind of small batch blender, we can also, as we say, reserve the right to improve on a recipe. So it doesn't have to be entirely consistent if you can make it a bit better. And then when we're looking at limited editions, which is the other half of the business, which again, behind me, these are a lot of the kind of bottles that we have. It's about pursuing an idea, a flavor, a thought, a piece of commentary. It's weird. Like, one of the whiskeys we made a few years ago is called Velikor. I'll give you, this is a kind of a breakdown into how we make whiskey very differently sometimes to other people. Velikor is a word from a website. It's called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And it's this guy who's trying to give words to things that don't have words.
Okay.
And so Velikor, to him, is the wistful nature and aroma of old bookshops.
Yes.
Velum, Ikor, and James, our director of whiskey making, funnily enough, loves old bookshops. And he loves that note, especially in kind of old whiskies. And so he's like, well, I'd like to make a whiskey called Velikor that was evocative of this idea of old bookshops and the aroma of them.
Right.
And so we did.
That's awesome.
Actually, I think I've got... So there.
Oh, wow.
And then you can see on the design, it's kind of same idea. It's all those old books. I love that kind of stuff. That's one of the things that we get to do. That is, sometimes the conversations we have around new whiskey, especially limited edition, just go into the strangest places. I think the other day we were talking about the ship of Theseus.
And that's what it's really all about, right? It's the whiskey has a story. It has its own story, and then you put a cool label on top of it, and it just opens it up to more and more and more. And when you pour a dram and sit down with somebody and have a conversation, and you could be talking about sports or politics. Don't talk about politics, but you could be talking about anything, and you can make it better because the whiskey gets invited into the conversation most of the time. That's how I feel.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I look at with the core collection is that they are whiskies that have character. So even though they're very flavor driven, we've recently rationalized, we really recently brought the core range down to our core four. These are kind of the ones we'll make all year round, but they each have a different character, a different personality, a different vibe, if you can say vibe. And it means they kind of fit into a moment. And also at the same time, there's something interesting about them, but they're a tool to have conversations by. I think a lot of whiskey people nowadays talk about how whiskey is actually this convivial drink. It used to be very insular, right? It used to be about kind of yourself next to a fire on a leather armchair. And it's kind of broken through that reputation.
Yeah, it has. It really has. And so we'll get into the core four here in a second, but I wanted to ask another question about, and I know there's certain aspects you can't talk about in this, but like when you're sourcing the said barrels from the distilleries, are they willing and happy to work with you, or is it kind of one of those ones you got to kind of not bribe them, but you got to be like, come on, I promise it'll be good. You know, how do you go about sourcing the said barrels that you're going to use in your blend?
We're very lucky. We're very lucky that we've been going for as long as we have, because we've got these long-standing partnerships, relationships within the industry, and that has allowed us. And because of that, we've got this credibility. So that allows us to have access to stock that I think a lot of other people might struggle with. It depends on the time of year. So it depends on the current situation within the secondary market. I won't go too much into the whole cask supply, kind of how it all works. Quite frankly, because I'm not entirely sure exactly how it works sometimes. But I could talk about how, for us, these relationships, because we talk about the whiskey in a really positive way when it comes to us. It's not just an ingredient. We like to showcase it, highlight it. I think in some ways, we have a reputation for using a lot of Clynelish. We might be part of why people love Clynelish. Obviously, it's kind of because Clynelish is so good. But yeah, so like, and stuff like that. It's like, so we have that kind of, people know that we're going to be good custodians of it. And so we're buying whiskey that we have available as aged stock and aging it further. We're buying whiskey as new make. So we've been doing that for a number of years. And that helps us to shore up supply and also be a bit more in control of our own destiny. So we can kind of forecast out and know that we're going to have certain whiskeys developing certain whiskey profiles that we're kind of going to have access to in the future.
Right.
And so it's a number of different ways, but it's never having to beg or bribe.
Right. Absolutely. Because that's, obviously in business, the bottom line matters. And, there is some distilleries out there that think their product is better than others. And so they want more money for it or whatever. So if you can have a good long-standing relationship with your suppliers, it just makes it that much easier to create a good product in the end, because you're not already frustrated in the process because you had to spend twice as much on a barrel or whatever. It's starting off on a good foot, I guess. And then therefore all of that intention doesn't go into the bottle negatively, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there is also this thing within Scotch especially, but I think it's all whiskies and maybe most spirits, is there's a sense of conviviality, of good relations within the industry.
Right.
It's, you see a lot of the cutthroatness maybe happens at more kind of like when you're further away from the product. But, if you go to Scotland and you go visit a distillery, everyone who works at distilleries, they're all friends. They all go to the same pub. Like Speyside's just full of people. And so there is a sense within it that there isn't hostility between companies. In fact, actually, there's that sense of like a rising tide carries all ships. And so it's quite nice. So oftentimes I find that some brands are very protective of their brand identity. That makes complete sense. And if that's part of what they want, that's how they want their whiskey to be known. It's not used in other blends. It's only used by one company. You kind of also understand that. And I think that kind of no one's setting out to do anything maliciously. And again, that's one of the things I love about Scotch in particular, but whiskey probably in general.
Absolutely. Because once you go and get into bourbon, and I'm not saying the bourbon guys are doing this as well, but like it does get a little bit more competitive. They don't want to blend around with products. They want, hey, this is mine. This is Jim Beam. It's mine. It's always going to be mine. We're not outsourcing to people. There is, people that sell their stock, houses that will sell you barrels and stuff like that, but it's not, I hate to say it like this because I am in America and I want to make sure that I present that well, but at the same time it's like it is a little more like it's mine, I'm not letting you have it, whereas I feel in Scotland it's like, yes, we're all a big family, make it better if you can, please.
Yeah, I mean, blending as its own thing is baked into the history of whiskey.
Right.
The idea of companies buying and selling. So, and when I say companies, I mean the big multinationals buying, selling
Right.
each other's stock, different distilleries buying each other's and selling each other's stock. It's like if you're making, and because all of them have their own blended whiskey, their own blended product. If you're trying to make a whiskey and you can't find the profile in your own stocks and reserves, then you'll have it from something you've bought from someone else. And so you'll
Right.
have warehouses that are full of the most bizarre array of different casks. Sometimes we benefit from this because you'll have let's say a distillery manager's, a warehouse manager's experiment where they've blended something and they put it into the back of a warehouse. No one has any idea what's in it. And so you have this one mysterious cask, and because we're so flavor based, we can be like, we'll take your mysterious cask and we'll do something with it. And they're like, but it's got no brand on it. It's got no name. We're not even particularly sure what's in it. It's like, doesn't matter. It's delicious. We'll do something.
Right. Right.
But that kind of, so that's that sharing, and it's always been part of it. And the reason why I say blending is baked in is because blending is how Scotch started with blending. And then
Right.
even single malts, if we're being very clear about this, are blends.
Right.
They're just blends from one distillery. You'd have to go to a single cask, single release to find something that hasn't had a blender.
Right. Exactly.
I always find that amusing.
That is amusing. Everybody thinks single malt, they're like, oh, it's just, no, it's a blend of like, 50, 100 barrels, whatever, it's not like it's one barrel. Now, if it was like you say, a single cask, that'd be one thing. But, and as like you were saying earlier, the flavor drift from barrel to barrel, going through that is obviously a thing. I know in Scotland, it is a little bit different. It is a little more cohesive. Like in America with bourbon, you can have 20 to 30% difference in a barrel. I know in Scotland it's a little bit less, but there still is definite flavor differences. So let's turn a little bit and get into the core four. These are the 4 bottles that you guys have on the shelf or ready to purchase at all times or during different times of the year. What are those, and kind of give us a little bit of background on each one if you can, if you have the time.
I absolutely do. It'd be my pleasure. So we've got 4. 2 of them come from our old kind of portfolio, and then 2 we've created new to kind of fit into this very flavor direction led range. We begin with our Orchard House. So Orchard House we released in 2021. This is kind of a cool one. It's a profile that's not super usual in Scotch whiskey. It's light, it's fruit forward. It's not got a huge amount of oak. It's got enough that it's there to help accent those fruit flavors. But those light kind of apple, pear drop notes haven't been overwhelmed by the oak. But it began as not a problem, but maybe like a kind of happy, not even happy accident. When we received the kind of new make that we were using, so this is primarily Clynelish and Linkwood, so whiskey from the Clynelish distillery, whiskey from the Linkwood distillery, we found that after 5-6 years, they didn't have as much oak character as we thought they would. We were using first fill ex-bourbon, and
Right.
we were looking to recreate a whiskey we used to make called Oak Cross, which is very oak predominant.
Mm-hmm.
And what we discovered is that they kind of were lacking that, but because of that, they had these really lovely ethereal light fruit notes. And so rather than going, oh my God, we can never make a Oak Cross again, we went, well, what can we make with this? And that's where Orchard House came from. And we kind of talk about where that comes from. We think a lot of the casks are water rinsed. So, the process of water rinsing a bourbon barrel, we're getting the last kind of remnants of the liquid out of it, which is fine. It's a good way of kind of getting something out to dilute the bourbon that's going to improve the flavor, but it's sort of stripping away that character for the first fill bourbon casks. But yeah, like I said, not a problem for us, but an opportunity.
Right. That's awesome.
So
So that
yeah,
kind
no,
of
it's
go ahead. Sorry.
no. All I was going to say is that that's kind of the beauty of being a blender, being a blending house, is that we can take those things. We're not beholden to a profile that we always have to make, and the idea of innovating or iterating is again inherent within it.
Mm-hmm. That that is so cool. So did you kind of discontinue the Oak Cross and now this one is taken over, or are you going to re-release Oak Cross at some point, or?
No, so Oak Cross had to be retired in about 2018, I think. And so this was the process of trying to come up with a new whiskey. It takes
Got it.
quite a while to come up with a new core collection whiskey for us,
I'm sure.
because again, you're trying to work out what you want to make, why does it exist, and getting the flavors right, the balance right, and also the name and the label. So I mean, Orchard House took a while to get to as well. Even though people look at the label, people often say, "I feel like I'm drinking the label," which is cool. Bit dangerous. Don't drink labels, but at the same time, like it's nice that it connects with people that way, and it sort of neatly takes us onto the next one in the range that we created, which is Nectarosity. So this one is new. So Orchard House is from 2021. Nectarosity is from 2024. And that is all about trying to explore that wood character, that bourbon influence, that sweetness that's inherent within those, but not making it too sweet, trying to draw out those lovely kind of like honey, toffee notes, while also keeping some of that underlying fruit. So you can see the difference between something that's relatively unoaked and something that has much more of that first of all bourbon. We also, which is kind of cool, didn't wait for them to pass the cask to pass through the bourbon system. We actually were buying virgin American oak, seasoning it with grain whiskey, taking the grain whiskey out, aging it further, and then we were putting full whiskey from the Clynelish distillery into that. So into that seasoned cask, and then using that as like a proto bourbon cask.
Absolutely.
So we know how much has been there. We haven't done anything else to it. So we're again trying to control that more, so we can create a more consistent whiskey.
That's really cool because like we were saying earlier, even if you get old used bourbon casks from America or whatever, the consistency could be different. Like depending upon who you can get it from, the consistency could, one week you're getting from Jack Daniels, the next week you're getting from Jim Beam. It could be all over there, and you want your profile to be. Obviously, if you're building a brand, you want the profile to be as cohesive as possible. And when you have different barrels from different areas, and then when you can do that in-house, that just makes it cooler for one, but it also makes it something like, hey, so then you take that grain whiskey and you use it in your blends as well, correct?
Oh, it goes back into Nectarosity as well.
Yeah. So
it's got all these different bits that are coming through each other, and they're just, and again, it's for us, it's finding the range of flavors. One of the great things about whiskey, Scotch in particular, is that it has the broadest spectrum of flavor of any distilled spirit. Like it's got the widest variety, the kind of, and you take those different distilleries and you imagine them as being kind of little, it's a whole spectrum, they're little parcels of that spectrum. And then you can start taking more bits of it and then adding them together, and you can explore anything. There's sort of infinite possibilities.
Yes.
And so creating more tools within our toolkit, more paints within our color palette, as one of our whiskey makers, Michael, would say. He talks about how blending is like taking, a single malt can be one distillery. It's like the best blues you'll ever see, but you add a bit of green in here, a bit of yellow, and you start to make a full picture of something.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, anything that can give us more colors in our palette is exciting.
That is exciting. It reminds me of, and I don't know if you've seen that, the meme of the guy, and he has a little red string going from one thing to the other, and he's like, it's right here. You can see it. Like it's all these different, you're pulling from everywhere, pulling from all these different distilleries and making a cohesive thing that goes together. And then you're like, wow, that's weird. Let's put that back here and let just sit on it for a little bit and see what happens. The fact that you guys get that liberty to just kind of, and I hate to say play around, but you get the liberty to play around a little bit and be like, hey, what would happen if we put these two guys together or these six guys together? What is the highest number of blends that you've put into one blend?
Components. Again, this is we separate things out into components, which tend to be parcels of whiskey. So a parcel of whiskey being anywhere between 1 cask and I think maximum 20.
Oh, wow.
And parcel will be ones that are kind of aged at the same time. So filled into the cask at the same time, put in the same warehouse, same type of cask. But we always try and taste as many of the casks as possible to make sure there's not too much variation, or that they're all progressing. Again, depending on what you're aging in, if it's first fill bourbon, pretty consistent. If it's a sherry cask, kind of need to taste everything because you can go some crazy places. So in terms of the number of varieties that have gone into one bottling, gosh, I think I've seen one with 18 different 18 different parcels before. But a lot of those might be the same distillery, but have been aged for a different number of years. So you'll have like a 17-year-old in a small percentage that maybe does one thing, and then you've got a broader 12% of that same distillery, but a younger age that's giving you more of the base. There's always a point behind it. I think one of the funny things I've noticed, well, not noticed, but one of the funny things I like to talk about with what we do is that we have 2% of something in a blend. And often people will say, why is there 2%? In Orchard House, for instance, which is a very light fruit-forward whiskey, there's 2% whiskey from the Cowlila distillery. Oh, why is there smoky whiskey in here? And it's twofold. One, you know if it's not there. So you taste the sample side by side, and you're like, okay, this is crazy. There is a noticeable difference. This one falls off. It disappears too quickly. I like to think about it as like the smoke helps to slightly entangle those ephemeral flavors so that it keeps them around for a bit longer and then allows the finish to extend beyond the natural length of what a kind of very light whiskey would normally do.
Guys, I know you are so deep into the Compass Box podcast that you're like, what is he doing? Why is he coming in the middle of this? But it's for a good reason, I promise. It really is. I wanted to talk about our sponsor, Hinterhoff Distilling. Now, this is the Calaveras cast strength single barrel reserve. That was hard to say. Sorry. This is a straight bourbon whiskey finished in wine barrels. This is a great bottle. It goes great in an old fashioned. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that bottle. We're here to talk about the brand. Hinterhoff, as you well know, they came on the podcast. They are out of Arnold, California. Yeah. And they are doing single malts, bourbons, cordials, gin, all the things, right? They are doing it all. They're trying to do it as best they can with the terroir and stuff like that. So that got me thinking. I like to do a lot of background on my sponsors when I have them come over. So one thing I did was I went to their malting house. They have a company that they're working for that's malting their grain, and that's called Admiral Malting. And they're out of Alameda, California. And they are California's first floor malting facility ever, since Prohibition, obviously. And they are California's first certified organic granary, whatever you call it. So that's super cool. So good stuff in, good stuff out, right? So what they are doing is they are giving that good grain to Hinterhoff to make good whiskey with. So why don't you go out and pick you up some? Go to hinterhoffdistilling.com. Tell them the shaman sent you. I don't know if it'll give you a perk or anything, but at least it'll make me feel good, right? No, but go over there and pick you up a bottle. I think the Warming Hut might have been sold out, which was their winter spirit. If it's not, pick you up a bottle of that because it's amazing as well. You heard about it on another podcast. But I want to thank Hinterhoff and Nate over there for helping us out and sponsoring us. And it's going to be a fun ride. Make sure you go to hinterhoffdistilling.com. Y'all be good. Right. That is so cool. And you don't have to put a lot. Just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of an edge. And everybody, when they think of smoky whiskey, I know we're going to get into some smoky bits here in a minute, but when you get into smoky whiskey, it tends to linger because those congeners are in that smokiness. So it just kind of sits on the palate for a long time. So think about, and I've encouraged people who listen to do their own blending at the house, putting 2 drops of something smoky in your glass. It will ride for a long time with that. And so it's really cool that even on a light, fruity, whiskey, you're putting a little bit of smoke in it, not enough to, it might not even be super detectable, but at the same time, it's there and it gives it backbone and it gives it a longer finish. That to me is super cool.
Yeah, it gives it structure. It has a meaning. Everything that we do has a meaning. It very rarely, in fact, never do I know anything that we've done where we did it because it didn't add something to it. It's like, so talking about grain whiskey and nectarosity, to go back to that, people often look at blended scotches as being inferior. A lot of the whiskies I'll talk about here are blended malts, so we're just taking whiskey from single malt distilleries. Nectarosity is a blended scotch. It's only 30% grain whiskey, but the grain whiskey there is of a significant age. And also some of it's gone through this kind of virgin American oak system that we have. And it's not because we're trying to pad out the whiskey. It's because we're talking about something that's sweet and vibrant and kind of big. And grain whiskey in First World Bourbon and virgin American oak can do that for you.
Yeah.
And it can add a texture. It's got syrupy quality to it. And so suddenly it's not filler, it's a crucial component.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That is so cool, because and a lot of people think, like you said, grain whiskey is subpar because everybody wants the single malts and stuff like that. But I don't know. There's something about a blended scotch that it's very cohesive. It's very easy to drink. It's very, I don't want to say the word smooth, but it's has a very nice palate on it. And it just, whereas some of the others are, they can get a little funky on you. I mean, I'm not going to lie, they can get a little funky. So let's move on to the third one that you had in the list.
So that's the peat monster. We said we get to peat, and here we are. This is the oldest in our range, by the way. This one, technically, the first peat monster, which was originally called the Monster, it's from 2003. So it's one of the first whiskies we started with. It was a collaboration, what we call a bespoke. So bespoke whiskies are a third category outside of core and limited edition. That's where we work with a partner, someone we've been working with a very long time, or someone who shares similar values to us or is interested in things, and we'll make a whiskey either for them or with them. This was Park Avenue Liquor Store back in 2003, and John at the time was going back and forth with kind of the head of the company, and he was asking for more smoky whiskey, more peat, and so samples going back and forth across the pond. And finally, one arrives, and John read this note and said, "This one's a monster." And it was. And that's where the monster started. And so from the monster, because for obvious legal reasons, you can't call a drink Monster. There's another brand out there that takes that name. We had the peat monster. And what's funny at the time is 2005, I think we released the first official The Peat Monster. It was super peaty. It was really intense. It was way, way more than what's going on in the market. And since then, things have gone even crazier. Things have really ramped up, and I like to think that we started this sort of peat arms race, but we maintained it. And so a lot of peat heads will try peat monster and go, "It's not really a monster." It's it was a monster for the time, but also it's a bit of a chameleon. It sort of evolves and is changing. But ultimately, it's to help rehabilitate the kind of profile of peated whiskey, because peated whiskey in the peat monster is balanced and it's complex. It's sort of ironically elegant for something called the peat monster and something that's peaty, but it's got this sweetness behind it, this sort of really endearing kind of sweet smoke, barbecue kind of character on the nose, and then on the palate, it's just very full, but without being overwhelming. We say blending is also for balance. This is a really great example of it.
Right. And would you?
This one, by the way.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this one, by the way, very easy blend to remember. It's 66% whiskey from Caolila and 33% whiskey from Lefroy.
Ooh, Lefroy, good job. So, would you consider that? Would you consider that your signature?
As in, is Peat Monster our signature whiskey? Or well, no. So we don't have a signature whiskey. We have one which is older than Peat Monster. Okay. That's Hedonism.
Oh yes.
Hedonism we've been doing since we started. It's not a core whiskey anymore. It's what we call a limited annual release. What we were finding is, because Hedonism is a blended grain whiskey, it's on average about 18 to 20 years old. We were finding that it's increasingly hard to find the quality of grain whiskey in those ex-bourbon casks that made the kind of made the cut for hedonism. And so rather than get rid of it, which we normally do, so we've retired whiskies before in the past when we can't make it anymore, when it doesn't make any sense, or when it's a story that doesn't need to be told. But hedonism is something we'd always like to continue making. So what we've done is we've transitioned it to being once a year. So everyone knows when it comes out in February. There'll be a certain amount. We'll make it for that year. We won't make any more, and then we'll wait until the next year to make another again. And because we're kind of doing this, we've typically tried to elevate the recipe a bit, so up an ABV a bit for time. So potentially we'll look at older age statements. We'll look at kind of the last of, in hedonism 2024, it's the last of our Cameron Bridge in 1990s stock. So that's almost entirely wheat based.
Okay.
And so it's driving a lot of this kind of, and so there's very little about mash bill in Scotch. It's not really talked about because we were, like, some of us were around at that time. You kind of do know what they were doing. And so we also are then working with a different artist every year to do the label, talking about how labels are really cool. This is a crazy fact. Hedonism was the first ever woman to appear on the label of a Scotch whiskey in 2000.
Wow, that's awesome.
There've been a lot of men. There've been a lot of men in kilts. And so because of that, each year we're getting a different female artist to do kind of her interpretation of the hedonism woman and what she means to them. So next one's coming out 2025, February. There's pictures out on the internet already because of TTB, as always. That's a whole separate conversation, but it's always funny how we can't ever release anything perfectly because there's always going to be someone finding it. But I also quite like that. It's almost like an Easter egg hunt. But we're just excited to see how people respond to that. So that's the unofficial fifth whiskey in our core four.
Okay, so what was the fourth one after Peat Monster then?
Fourth one is Crimson Casks. So this is another new one for 2024. Crimson Casks is sort of the pinnacle of the range. It's all about red wine and sherry casks. Oh. So what's funny about this is people ask me about kind of where the name comes from. It's because everyone talks about cask finishing. It's all like oak cask, triple cask, whatever. Crimson Casks is evocative. It's the idea that crimson is about both drama and also the color crimson, which they are in themselves. And so you're able to kind of like play into this idea of the dramatic, the intensity, as well as telling people what it's going to probably taste like, which I always think is like a fun thing to do. And for people who know Compass Box, they'll recognize that we don't have two whiskeys that we used to have. Spice Tree, we made the last one last year. So I think it was September 2023. Similar thing with the Story of the Spaniard. So that had been around less time. Spice Tree had been around forever. It's one of the first whiskeys we got in trouble with the SWA with. But rather than retire them and kind of not do something with that, we brought the best of both, because Spice Tree was rich, intense, and spicy, and Story of the Spaniard was rich, intense, and sherried. And so why not bring that spice? There's still some components that are from what we call a Highland malt blend in Crimson Casks, and then also that kind of like idea of sherry and red wine to kind of bring about something that was more intense, more big, but crucially not a sherry bomb. It's layered, it's structured, it's got depth.
Awesome.
That was
awesome. That one to me sounds really cool. I don't think I've seen that one in store yet, but you know, being in Podunk where I'm at, it's you're gonna have to go to the bigger city, I guess, to find it. But that one is really interesting because, as you well know, everybody's getting it, which Scotch has been cast finishing for forever, but now it's coming over to America. And everybody's finishing their bourbons and stuff and blah, blah, blah. And so people are getting more and more into cast finishing. And it's really cool that you guys are just kind of leaning into that. And I'm sure it's going to have a cool label on it and all the things that go with it. Is it a blended malt or a blended Scotch?
Blended malt. Okay. And I think what's funny for us, because I agree, everyone has been cask finishing. And almost there is this idea that like you put whiskey into a sherry cask, any sherry cask, and suddenly you can charge more for it. And so not wanting it to be that, because that's not how we do business, that's not how we make whiskey. It had to add extra complexity, extra depth to it. We work with an amazing warehouse in Jerez, Miguel Martin, who I think a lot of people kind of work with, but we're able to control the aging process for those casks. I'm sure most of the audience will know this, but there's no such thing as a sherry cask anymore. It's all sherry seasoned.
Yeah, sherry seasoned.
But sherry seasoning is not actually a problem. It's sort of the solution to the thing. It in the same way that controlling your own aging, controlling your own warehousing, your own casks, this allows you to control exactly what congeners go in, what you take out, what kind of cask you're going to get, and gives you that little bit of consistency. Some people will say that takes away the romance of old bottles where you got no idea what's going to happen and you can find these absolute miracles. Those are great, but you're forgetting the 95% of other whiskies that may have come out of that system.
Right. Yes, sir. Yeah.
And so, that rounds off our core four. You'll see there are four very clear directions, right? You've got light fruit, cask-driven sweetness, that Islay smoke, and then at the same time, you've got this kind of like lovely, rich, intense sherry. But each one of them is done in a very different way to the other, like traditional whiskies in those styles. I've also not talked about regionality, apart from Islay. That's because that's where all the peated whiskey largely is made. And it's because for us, we often will blend across profiles. We're blending for specific flavor combinations.
Right. So do you have a release that is only only Highland or only Lowland or anything like that? Do you do releases like that are just blends of certain regions?
Not really. I mean, the closest is the Peat Monster, with it just being two Islay whiskies.
Right.
And I don't think we would, because actually, as soon as you lock yourself into making a Highland whiskey to taste like Highland whiskies, you're locking yourself out of all of the Highland malts that don't taste like Highland malts at all, because there's no such thing as a Highland malt.
Yeah, I get it.
Naturally, is what I mean. It's not given to that region.
Right. That to me, that's super cool that you say that, because you're right. You try one Highland, it's not like the other. There's some really obscure Highland malts out there that you can find that are just, that's a little off, not off in a bad way, but off profile. And you're like, but I really like that. So it's really cool that you're just kind of playing around and finding unique casks as well that kind of give a little bit to the blend in itself. So what are some of the challenges that either you personally in the business have had, or that Compass Box as a whole has had in this whole? I mean, y'all been a long time in this game. What are some of the challenges that you've ran into? Casks exploding, whole lines not selling because it just didn't work out, nobody liked it. I doubt that one happened, but give me a couple of the challenges y'all been working with.
Yeah, I mean, so for us, our challenges are very different to most other Scotch whiskey companies. We're not sitting on things that we can't use. We buy whiskey that we can use. We're not a distiller, so therefore we don't have to worry about that aspect of it. But I guess that also means that it comes with a certain level of, we can't control the distillation. But in that case, that's not necessarily a problem. In the way that I've talked about with other whiskies, is if you start making one, it's a beautiful constraint because you can start making something else.
Yes.
In terms of actual kind of issues, everyone goes through the same kind of production problems. We've definitely had one whiskey before where, because we try everything all the time, very difficult job, obviously horrible for us. We have to taste the casks, and then we have to taste the prototypes, and then when we vat everything, we have to taste the vatting, and then when we marry the whiskey. And so this is where we take those vattings that we put, so that's the original recipe, we put them into casks that were put in to make that whiskey. And then we have to taste those casks, then we have to put it back into a vat, and then we have to bottle it, and we have to taste the bottling. And so at times things can go wrong. We had one where we don't think the filter had been cleaned properly from a heavily sherried whiskey that had gone before. That whiskey was not meant to have any sherry in it, but we just changed the recipe. So rather than going, oh God, what are we going to do? We went, let's take it back, put it back into casks. Now let's do this properly. Let's intentionally add some sherry character to this whiskey. And I think arguably it became a better whiskey for it. But it's still those kind of things sometimes present themselves. But being adaptable, being flexible, and like I said before, not being strictly beholden to, let's say, a large business standard means that we can make things that become and evolves to something else. It's a Picasso quote that used to sit on our old blending room wall, which was, "I begin with an idea and it becomes something else." And I just think that's a great company ethos to have for a small business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that leads me into the bottle I was talking to you about before we press record. And I, if you can, and if this is I feel like it is, but talk to us a little bit about a marrying cask. I've talked about it in the past, but obviously I'm not as eloquent of a speaker as you. We were talking about none other than the Artist Blend. This is a single marrying cask. So would you consider this a single barrel if you were going to do a single barrel?
That's the blending equivalent of a single barrel release.
Okay.
What that is that we've taken the vatting. So we've created an artist blend recipe, got all our casks together. So the way we do that is we take lots of different samples from the office. So in our blending room, we'll put them together, devise a recipe, taste it, send the instruction up to Scotland, because it's Scotch whiskey. It has to be distilled in Scotland, aged in Scotland, and then bottled in Scotland. So we do work with partners up there. And so then from that vatting, everything gets put back into casks. Some of those casks, I said we were trying them. Some of them are amazing. Some of them are so good, we're like, actually, this is not going back into that vatting. This is going to go to the side, and this will become a single marrying cask. This is like an exceptional, and then we might leave it for a bit longer. And so you can leave it for a period of 6 months to maybe a couple of years. And so we'll talk about the distillery that's from. So I believe you said that one is an ex-Linkwood cask.
Correct.
So when I said we put the recipe together, and then when we marry them, we're putting them back into the casks that went in to make that original vatting. And so you've got some aging in Linkwood. In the case of an artist blend, there's some aging in ex-Clynelish, or maybe you've got some ex-Cameron Bridge. And so they're going to age in different ways. And then over time, they're going to develop even more different characters. And so from there, we give the opportunity for certain accounts to maybe purchase one. And then you can use that to kind of higher ABV to discuss not only the inherent artist blend. I like to put it next to the kind of base character of the whiskey. You can see what a bit of aging in something as innocuous as a Linkwood cask.
Right.
Linkwood is a very clean, very clear, kind of fruit-forward spirit, but it changes it so much. So it's again, we talk about the variety of flavors, exploring that spectrum. It's another point along that trail.
Yes. Yeah. And I've, like I said, I've dipped into this bottle a little bit. This was a special release or whatever through a bourbon group that I have, which I'm really excited that bourbon groups here in America are getting some Compass Box, because that you don't see that too often. They're all going after all the tater bottles and stuff like that. So that bottle to me is really, it's special, but it's also like, it's really approachable and easy to drink. And the fact that you say on the label, no color added, non-chill filtered, and it was bottled at 49%. So like, you're even going above the threshold of the 46 for everyone who's listening, so like that to me is a big component of it. And obviously you guys have a lot of the information on the back of the bottle itself, which to a normal person who would just pick it up on the shelf, they're going to look at the back of the bottle and be like, oh, okay, this has ABC, this is what I might be able to taste out of it. That to me is super cool. When you get the bottles that say, this is a heritage brand from a heritage company that's been around for 3 years, like that gets a little chinchy sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And the point about no color added and not chill filtered, that's something we've been doing since the beginning. Certainly, it's a philosophy. It's a point of integrity for us that you don't chill filter, because if you chill filter, you're essentially removing fatty long chain acids. To get really nerdy about it, and that's going to add textural quality. It's debatable. Some people say it does add flavor. It doesn't add flavor. It definitely affects texture, and texture is really important to us. That's a really key part of of the blend. And then the no color added just seems obvious. It's madness that in a process where you can only add two things to a whiskey once it's in its bottling phase, water for dilution and caramel E150A food coloring, one of those things is not like the other.
Yes, yes, you're right. And it does not, again, it does not affect anything other than the eyes, right? You're looking at it, you look at it and you say, it looks darker, therefore it must be better, or it must be older, or it must be this. No, it's just, they just put the thing in there. It's fine. The issue we have here in Texas is our whiskey's getting too dark. It's almost black on the inside, and we're trying to slow down the aging process and get more maturation. So they're doing, slow water reduction in the barrel and stuff like that to get a 5-year, 6-year, 8-year whiskey, because it is maturing so fast and it just tastes like a piece of wood by the time it's out of the barrel, and obviously we don't want that. So it's really cool that you guys are just like, no, we're not gonna do any of that, because you could send out a 40% bottom of the barrel whiskey and people would buy it because of the brand that you guys have built up. But you don't. You decide, hey, we're gonna do it the right way. We have to put, our name is on this, so we want it to be the best product we can put out there, and that to me is really cool. So I have a couple more questions, but what I saw, you have a bunch of bottles on the back shelf. What is one of the, and I know pricing is all over the place, but what is one of the most expensive, or the rarest bottles that you guys have released?
So it depends. If we mean in recent times, because there's a difference between what we put it as in terms of the cost and what the secondary market maybe values it at. So yes. We the most expensive whiskey we've ever released in terms of actual cost was Tobias the Angel. That was a very simple blend. It was just whiskey from Caolila, the Cali distillery, whiskey from the Pine Leach distillery at, I believe, 27 and 34 years old. Why did we do that? Because we love those whiskeys and they are great individually and they are incredible together. But in terms of the rarest or the most expensive, we are famous for one whiskey in particular in the secondary market, and that's the General. The General is one of those funny whiskeys where it uses, I was talking about those casks that are at the back of a warehouse that no one's got any idea what's in them. It used a few of those, and there's that initial trepidation, a little bit of people going, hey, what is this? What is this all about? And then I think people started opening them up and going, wow, this is, wow. And they went very quickly, and now they fetch quite a significant amount more in the secondary market than we ever charged for it.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds amazing. I've seen it once, but yeah, you don't see those ones too often for sure. So let's talk about upcoming releases. Do you have any special releases? Because I know you do special releases. Do you have any of those coming up?
Yeah, we have one that's going to be launched in a week.
Oh wow, perfect.
So I could talk a little bit about it.
Okay.
I could talk about one of the things I think is really cool about it. So it's based around the idea of smoke.
Okay.
But that actually a lot of people don't appreciate the underlying and inherent sweetness within smoke.
Right.
And that actually, if you take it back a little bit, we're using some really interesting cask finished whiskey that we've been doing. And you get to explore those underlying fruit, jam, honey notes that too often when you take whiskey to this ridiculous ppm, you lose a little bit of. But my favorite bit about it is that back in 2022, we were filling some casks that we got, some dessert wine casks. And we had a range of dessert wine casks. I think there were some masala casks that we didn't know what to put in them. And James, our whiskey making director, was like, what do you want to put in it? And it's like, well, why would we could say what we want to put in it, but why don't we ask our fans? So we sent out a newsletter and we said, look, here's some casks. We've got a choice of 3 different distilleries that we could probably put in and finish in here. What do you want to see from us? And so they voted. They voted overwhelmingly Lefroy, unsurprisingly, in many ways. And so this is those parcels of whiskey from 2022 through to 2024 finally coming into a blend, which I think is really cool. I just think that's, and so I like the fact that someone can track the kind of the thing they did 2 years ago. They get to see a bit of like what it is to be a whiskey maker, that you have to wait 2 years to finally get. I mean, 2 years is very short in whiskey making terms, to finally get an output on what you made a decision on.
Absolutely, because it's one of those things, like, you know, and I talk to a lot of people about this. It's like you put it in the barrel and you just cross your fingers and hopes that it's not going to be crap, right? You're like, I don't know, is it going to be good? And most of the time it is, obviously, but you know, it's like you're just kind of rolling the dice and hoping that the barrel plays nice with the whiskey and, you know, stuff like that. And then in the end, if you got a bad barrel, you got to either blend it out or be like, hey, you're going to sit for a little longer or whatever. To me, it's super cool and exciting to see that you guys continue to innovate and continue to push the boundaries of blending. And not only are you blending, you know, the same couple of distilleries you can get barrels from, but you're outreaching and finding new. Are you trying to go into some more? And this might be a question you can't answer, but are you trying to go into some more like of the craft type distilleries in Scotland, what I would call craft, you know, the smaller distilleries where they have a very unique cast? Are you doing any of that?
We certainly do use whiskey from all over Scotland. I don't know if there's anyone I can particularly call out as being kind of, we used some Loch Lomond peated grain for a whiskey a while back. So that's really unusual because it was a malt whiskey. They ran through their column still. So malt that they ran through the column still, so it becomes a grain whiskey by the magical property of what everyone just agrees. And they decided to use a peated malt. So it's even more confusing because you have this grain whiskey that tastes like a peated single malt. That was really cool. And then what we also sometimes do is we step out of the world of Scotch. So we're not always, we're Scotch Whiskymakers. We talk about whiskey making. It's a term that we came up with. It's because we kind of compare whiskey making with wine making. Mm-hmm. You know how so much of wine is about blending. Yes. All champagne is blended, really. And so, and it's very well appreciated over there. So we like to talk about how it's similar to that kind of assemblage. And so for us, on the whiskey making front, we can then go, well, maybe it's not always Scotch. 2019, we blended Calvados and Scotch whiskey.
Okay.
That was phenomenal. Like, what a cool combination, because so often people try and find these fruit notes within whiskey by using an ex-Calvados cask or an ex-apple brandy cask. And you're like, well, it's already inherent within the spirit. Just add it. Just put it in. See what happens.
Yeah.
We have to call it a spirit drink, and that does obviously affect how everyone perceives it, because now suddenly it's not Scotch whiskey anymore. But it doesn't matter to us because we made something that's delicious.
And that's amazing that you guys are just like, hey, let's try it. It's got to be good. You know, you get a good Calvados and a good Scotch and mix them together. It's like you're, making a cocktail in a glass already. So it's like, yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's actually funny enough. I think it's sitting right there, and the name of the whiskey is called Affinity because they have a natural affinity for each other.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that is amazing, and I'm really excited for you guys, and I'm so appreciative, Alex, for you coming on here and hanging out with me. Did I have another question? I always do this at the very end. Did I have another question? This is the issue, because as you're talking, I'm thinking of other things that we could talk about, and it hasn't. So okay, here's another one. Is you talked about peat monster, and I'm a big peat head, obviously. Is there any other? I mean, you have a little bit of smoky stuff in some of your other blends. Is there another blend that's similar to peat monster in its profile? That's even a limited release or something like that?
Two at the moment that you might be able to find. So one is the one we're releasing very soon. That is going to be, it is primarily smoky whiskey, but it's a bit less smoky than Peat Monster. Okay. And then we last year released Peat Monster Cask Strength Origin Story.
Yes, so I heard about that. Yeah.
What this was, and I can speak to it because I'm very proud to say my name is on the back of that label.
That is awesome.
because it was basically this idea that like Peat Monster is an inherently American story. It's about American influence within Scotch whiskey. You know, the story from Park Avenue Liquor Store, that it was that back and forth. Our founder John is American, and at the end of the day, Peat Monster is entirely, almost entirely, it's like 1% not ex-bourbon. And so you have this sort of story about how we've been influenced by America. So let's talk about that kind of origin story. Let's take it all the way back, and let's age a portion it in virgin American oak casks. And so the reason we can take it up to 56.7%, while still, because we don't want to release a whiskey you can't drink neat. It's important. Like, I know a lot of people like to have cask strength whiskies to dilute it down. The reason we like to release them at a certain percentage is because we think it's the best percentage to be drunk at. And so it was like, how can we get it to that ABV while at the same time maintaining this kind of quality that it's drinkable and it's balanced? And by finishing it in virgin American oak, I think about 60% of the recipe, you end up where that takes away some of the harshness. It gives it a bit more of that soft character. I'm one of those people who gets very, not annoyed, but I don't like to use smooth, because smooth doesn't tell you anything. Yes. Soft, because if anything, it's a textural thing. When people say smooth, they often mean it's inoffensive. But softness is something that's very real, and it gives it, so it takes away any of the sharp edges. And so you can have it at the higher ABV. Alcohol brings the flavor, and then at the same time, it's still not overwhelming.
Right. Wow. I need to see if somebody has one of those. Anyway, yeah, that's amazing. So I really appreciate you coming on here, Alex. And before we go, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you and the brand, if you want them to, and your website and stuff like that.
Yeah, so our website, compassboxwhiskey.com. Our socials, just search Compass Box. We will certainly be the first one. And then if you need to get a hold of anything of us, but specifically me, hello@compassboxwhiskey.com. I'm always here to answer any questions. It's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. I think a lot of times you'll find the hello at is manned by someone sort of very kind of far away from the business who's not particularly involved. No, it's me. I answer all the questions. We're a very small company. We've got like 27, 28 employees. So we all have to take on responsibilities that may seem to fit outside of your role. But for this one, I like it because it means that I can directly answer the questions that would normally come to me anyway. So let's just cut out the middleman.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I will tell you guys, he does respond back, and I appreciate you for I appreciate you for responding back to me, because this has been a hell of a time, and I appreciate all the stuff that you guys are doing. Y'all get out there, find you some Compass Box. It doesn't matter which one you get. Find one, try it. You're gonna love it. I guarantee you. I will have all of their stuff in the description down below, as always. And make sure you're following everything I'm doing, which you probably already are if you're listening to this. So I stick on, Alex. I want to talk to you for a second after, and y'all be good. Make sure you drink water. I know. Don't tell me what to do. I get it, but drink water. And until next time, keep your spirits up.